Welcome back to Living Outside the Matrix, the show where we examine important issues either ignored or misrepresented in the mainstream narrative. I'm your host, Nigel Howitt, and on the show today we're going to be discussing science, and specifically whether or not it has descended into pseudoscience and become simply a tool of big money, the powers that shouldn't be, or does it still have a vibrant heart somewhere? Is there still active science going on? So joining me to discuss this subject, it's a great pleasure to welcome back Patrik Holmqvist, IT expert from Sweden and host of Radio Cui Bono, his own podcast. Patrik, thank you for taking the time to join me again today, and once again, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Nigel. A pleasure to be here, as always.
So let's start, Patrik, by addressing the question of what is science and scientific method.
The common view on it is that we can only claim something to be true in the sense of science. And I mean, science is very special in our minds and our thoughts on that's our highest authority of truth. So when something is scientifically true, we hold that in the highest regard. But actually, if we pin down these things, you can't actually say that something is definitively scientifically true. What you can say is that something is scientifically confirmed. And that means it's true for now, but it can be a theory or a hypothesis, but it can be falsified, maybe eventually. And the way to falsify something scientifically confirmed is to come up with a relevant, repeatable observation or experiment, a control experiment that shows a different outcome from what this hypothesis or theory says. But if we design relevant control experiments or make independent, repeatable observations that fail to disprove this scientific theory or hypothesis, then it's regarded as scientifically confirmed. And what is very important to keep in mind here is that it's only actual, practical experiments or observations in the real world that can be repeated by others, scientists, if it requires advanced equipment, etc. But you actually cannot hold mathematical formulas, statistics, correlations, etc. You can use the words, there is a correlation between this and that, but that doesn't mean it's scientifically confirmed. But as we know, this is so mingled up and muddied up in science these days, and I think it's very, very frustrating. And science, I mean, the title of this podcast, it's The Demise of Science, or the
Fall of Science.
The Fall of Science, yeah. And this has been occurring especially during the 20th centuries. I mean, it's in an awful state.
Yes, well, we'll come on to cover some of the points that you can cite as evidence for that.
I can. Go ahead.
So scientific method, I mean, I think we're going to uncover the fact that scientific method, or what's been known as scientific method, where you generally observe reality and you're trying to explain some phenomena and you come up with a hypothesis, you maybe design an experiment to prove a particular point. And, generally these experiments have to have controls and so forth. and you're trying to validate your hypothesis essentially, and not sort of taking anything away from what you just said there, Patrik. And it should be rigorously logical, methodical, logical, reality-based, as you say, looking for facts. This is what science is about, as I think most of us still understand it. But the problem is that these days, with the advent of what is called artificial intelligence, there is a very popular view, I think, that science it's alive and well, and we can trust the science. Politicians were calling on us to trust the science in the recent alleged pandemic. So there seems to be what I would say a somewhat misplaced faith in science that is undermined by some of the things that I think we're going to come on to discuss, some of the non-scientific practices that we can see in what passes for science. So did you want to comment on any of that, Patrik?
Yeah, sure. I think that's kind of the heart of the matter, or the core, and that is that, I mean, as we describe it, and I mean, if you talk to scientists about this, they will agree about the scientific method, and it's about control experiments or observations. But then when you start to point out that many of these paradigms we have in science today, they don't adhere to this criteria. When you start to drill down, in the paradigms, the theories that that has stood for decades, sometimes even centuries, you don't find proper scientific evidence. But if you talk to about the scientist, and you point that out, then he doesn't become as friendly anymore. when you get to the actual issues. So it's very, and the thing is also that the problem here is that if you base science on paradigms and theories that aren't scientific in themselves, then the science you produce won't be science either, because you presume things that aren't scientific facts. They aren't scientific.
I think we can. Yes, I agree with you entirely. I think we can see that with the climate models, can't we? It's all about modeling in computers for the climate predictions, and of course the models, the computer models, are programmed with all of the many sort of unproven hypotheses, to be quite honest. So it's not really. It doesn't strike me as scientific at all to be using modeling, whether you're modeling, viruses and disease spread, or whether you're modeling climate change. It seems dangerous to me that we've already departed there from the real world, haven't we? We're already dangerously. We're not looking at facts. We're looking at predictions based on assumptions we've made in the past, which haven't actually been proven and 100% validated.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, yes, I don't think there's a problem to use, computer models or simulations or etc. It's a wonderful, powerful tool we have today, computers and AI and etc. But the problem starts when you base your models again on loose ground, on theories that aren't scientifically confirmed. And when you mentioned climate science, there was I think it was about a year ago or something now. I went to a lecture here in Sweden, Gothenburg, where I live, and listened to one of these climate researchers. And he talked about, the problems and the models and etc. And he had a lecture for about an hour, I think. And then there was a moment for questions, and I raised my hand and I got to ask a question. So, and what I said is that, so, the thing with this carbon dioxide that is in the atmosphere, I mean, we talk about it's 400 ppm. What is ppm? It's part per millions. But we say 400 because that sounds much more than 0.04%. So the carbon dioxide is a small amount of the atmosphere. And what they claim to affect the climate in a very drastic way is a very small amount of change in that small part from the beginning. So I said this and checked that he agrees that it's 400 ppm. And then I asked him, so what experiments and observations has been carried out in order to try to disprove this hypothesis? Because that's the job of a scientist. When he have a hypothesis or idea, his job is to seek out relevant experiments and observations that can disprove his hypothesis. And if he fails to do that, then he has a confirmed hypothesis. And if others fail to do it as well, that's the scientific process. So I asked him about that. And what I got back from him was just, I won't have a scientific discussion with you. Next question. He just shut me off.
Yes, that's really disappointing, isn't it, on a scientific issue?
Yeah, it is.
Yes, I mean, so maybe we can sort of go back in time a bit, Patrik, and look at sort of how science. I mean, most people will be aware that sort of aviation or human flight was sort of discovered around about the beginning of last century or a short while before. We've got very significant examples of inventions like the internal combustion, the discovery of electricity and its harnessing to become one of the most useful discoveries since fire or the wheel. I can't remember which. And we've got some really significant scientific discoveries. But there are definite points in the calendar where you could say that things become unscientific. And maybe we can begin with health. And the first one I wanted to maybe bat at you as a starting point is perhaps the debate between Béchamp and Pasteur about germ theory versus terrain theory. This was going on in the late 1800s. And there are some shenanigans going on here. Well, this was not. We seem to have come down in favour of Louis Pasteur's germ theory, but it doesn't seem to have been an even playing field or an honest debate. Would you agree?
When we talk about the fall of science, it's really interesting when you look back in history, and look at old dogmatic religions, etc., when the Catholic Church ruled in Europe, etc., because they had their saints, and so do we. We have the saints of science, and Pasteur is one of those saints of science. Most people know about Pasteur. What they don't know is that his theory, germ theory, has never been scientifically confirmed, despite several attempts to do so. And especially in the early 20th century, there were, 10 or 20 big studies carried out, and there have been several one after that, where they had volunteers. It was the Spanish flu.
The Rosenau experiments. Yeah.
So they had volunteers that exposed themselves to people who were sick in the Spanish flu. They even drank their bodily fluids, injected them. They did all kinds of things to become infected by this germ or virus. And they failed. And there we go again. I mean, if you have a theory or a hypothesis and experiments are carried out that don't prove them, then they shouldn't be considered, of course. I mean, that's science. But as we have seen, and I mean, it's I would say it has to do with business, because I mean, and that was something that Pasteur started with. He sold animal vaccines, and he carried out experiments, to demonstrate to the farmers, what happened if their cattle got the disease he could vaccinate them against. But the thing is, and not many have heard of it, there's a very interesting book that is called The Private Science of Louis Pasteur, because Pasteur was a very meticulous man, and he kept research diaries, lab books where he noted everything he did. And I mean, he did a lot of interesting things as well. But in these diaries, he confesses that he cheated, when he did these demonstrations and etc. It's so, and also there were relatives of Pasteur. They kept these diaries, despite Pasteur's expressive direction that they should be burned after his death. They should be destroyed, but they didn't do that. And then they gave them, they let the researcher read them in the 90s, and it became this book, The Private Science of Louis Pasteur. And there you have it, black on white. He was a cheater, and that is also confirmed by all the independent research that has been done afterwards. All these studies.
Yep.
So yeah.
Yeah, so and I mean, moving on through the chronological sequence there, I mean, although we're going back a little bit from the Rosenau experiments of 1918 and 1919, but in 1910 there was, of course, the Flexner report, wasn't there, which was commissioned by the US government, which essentially seemed to deliver the education of the medical profession, of doctors, into the hands of charitable trusts, the Rockefeller Foundation, the Carnegie Foundation. So it essentially gave to big money the ability to steer the education of medical doctors. And of course, we have the allopathic system that's come out of that. Lots of herbal stuff, and the use of cannabis and all sorts of things was ditched around that time, and it became the norm to prescribe a drug towards us. Obviously it took some time for this to happen, but the allopathic model took shape, where we now know it to be you take a pill for every ill, and it's symptom addressing. It's fundamentally unscientific to simply address a symptom without any interest as to the cause of it. I mean, there are lots of problems with modern medicine, but I think right at the base that's a fundamentally unscientific approach. Well, maybe it's not strictly speaking unscientific, but it's certainly an unhelpful approach. Would you agree?
Yeah, I agree. And what you speak about with the Flexner report and what's sometimes called Rockefeller medicine. I mean, in the early 20th centuries, I would say that medicine was slowly turned into a big business. And I mean, medicine, and that's something that goes through history as well, has always been a very possible lucrative business, because people have a very high interest in the product, stay and get well. That's the basis for everything. Anything we humans want to do in life, we want and need health. If we're sick, we can't do anything. So it's a very good sellable product. But the thing is that in any lucrative business you have competition, So you have to find out ways to get rid of the competition, to have a monopoly. And that was what beginning to happen. And so they took over the medical institutions by donating large sums of money to them. And then they, of course, could have a place in the board and talk about what the new doctors should learn. And then they figured out how to make medicine in advanced petrochemical processes, because at the time, there was a lot of pharmacists, and they mixed up. They did medicine in their basement, and they had, and I mean, they used cannabis and all kind of natural herbs. But that's not a good thing, because that's not a product you can have a monopoly on. But if you have access to advanced petrochemical industry, then you make stuff that the pharmacist cannot make themselves. And then you produce science, and you educate the doctors that they should only use and recommend these medicines should only be allowed to be used. And the thing also is, and that is, I would say that is becoming more and more apparent in medicine. And that is, if we look at medicine as a business. So what is the customers of this business? It's sick people. So how do you increase the customer base? You make people sick. And with enough pseudoscience, propaganda, etc. If you control the information, the science that is made, you can convince people to do and take things that make them sick, and so they become returning customers in this business and industry. And that is exactly, when you look at it from a bird's eye view or perspective, that is exactly what has happened during the 20th century.
Absolutely. Yeah. And of course, as time went on through last century, I can't remember whether it was John Enders first and his experiments on purification or isolation, as they call it in the trade, of viruses. And there was some serious question marks raised by some researchers over his work and the lack of controls therein. And of course, his work gave birth to the whole vaccination industry. But then also around about a similar sort of time, there was Ancel Keys doing his research into the fat hypothesis, and his sort of famously sort of his 7 countries study, where he sort of cherry picked results. And again, it was more of sort of an epidemiological study, but sort of presented ultimately as science. So that again, we see evidence of unscientific practice, maybe due to ultimately, I would suggest, political pressure, because rather like health is a very useful political tool. And I think that ultimately, as you say, it's been very much a big business, but it also has a very useful political component. And I think these other unscientific practices of Keys and Enders were similarly unscientific, and you could trace this through to as the century drew to a close with things like the AIDS scare, and a lot of the shall we say the reluctance of the establishment to listen to any naysayers. There was a group called the Perth Group that was seriously challenging the hypothesis that AIDS was going to kill us all. It was going to kill us all by the end of the decade. It was it was really bigged up as this massive, scary thing, and of course it never transpired. But the naysayers weren't listened to, and again, dare I call this unscientific? It may be not strictly speaking unscientific, but it's not really proper protocol. Would you agree?
Yes, I would agree. And I mean, if we go back to Enders and the so-called discovery of the virus and the vaccinations that followed, I mean, I just want to, vaccinations, they occurred before that. I mean, we had the smallpox and we had the Spanish flu, but and it's also interesting because the term virus, it has shifted meaning actually several times. I mean, in Latin, virus means poison. And the view before was that you had some kind of poison in the blood, virulence, etc. But then supposedly Anders isolated a virus in the 40s, I think it was, or was it in the 60s? Sorry, I'm not.
I think it was 54.
54, thank you. Yeah. And as you say, and this has been shown later on several times, that his so-called virus isolation or confirmation of the existence of virus was no such thing. And actually, in a section of the paper where Anders writes about this, he also mentions this, that he did control studies, a control experiment, and it failed. But it's just a small section, And I would say, if we're talking about the fall of science and science corruption, I would say it's very deep, and it's been going on for a long time, because as we know, Anders, he got the Nobel Prize for this discovery of the virus that wasn't scientific, and that of course gave it what's it called, credibility. So everyone, Anders had found a new pathogen here, the virus.
So I mean, in conclusion, right up to the sort of present day with the alleged pandemic and all of the other shenanigans going on, and again the computer modeling, it's arguably not best scientific practice going on in medicine. But maybe we can shift gears and approach the things like the double slit experiments, which I think the original double slit experiment was performed in 1804 by Thomas Young, but there were some revisions. I love that. The revised experiments. Obviously, somebody found that they could come up with some trickery, and they dug them up again. But I'd like to ask you your take on these double slit experiments, because they seem to give birth to the whole idea of quantum physics or theoretical physics, it seems to be a significant time for many reasons in the history of science. So maybe you could share with us your thoughts on that, Patrik.
I mean, it's so interesting because everything is connected, when you start to investigate this and look at what happened in science during the 19th and 20th century. And I would say that the double slit experiment was a finale, kind of, or the modified double slit experiment was a finale in getting rid of the ether. And why did I want to get rid of the ether? And a way to the start of getting rid of the ether, that is, I probably need to explain that as well. What is the ether? Well, before quantum physics, the light was considered to be only a wave. And now it's considered to be, it's a bit unclear, but it's considered to be a wave and a particle, or a particle that behaves like a wave. Physicists today talk about the wave-particle duality. And the reason that they do that is because of the so-called modified double-slit experiment. But I'll get to that. But before that, light and all electromagnetic radiation was considered to be only a wave. And the thing with a wave is that a wave always needs a medium. to propagate through. I mean, you have sound. Sound can only propagate through air or water or solid things. But if you try to make sound in a vacuum where you have removed all, it won't work because the waves can't propagate. And since light still works in a vacuum chamber, if you remove all the air, you can still shine a flashlight through the chamber. Medium was assumed, or elements that are even smaller than hydrogen and helium were assumed to be everywhere where light could propagate, because light was a wave. And this, I mean, there's been a lot of discussions, but as you mentioned, Thomas Young in the early 19th century kind of put an end to the discussion as to whether light is a wave or something else, because he devised an experiment that is called a double slit experiment. And what he showed with the double slit experiment is that if you shine a light on a plate and you have two slits that the light goes through, then what you will see on the wall, and then you have a screen behind these slits, what you will see on the screen behind these slits is what's called an interference pattern. And what is an interference pattern? Well, you can compare it if you have waves, going against a pier. But in the pier, you have slits as well, so the water and the wave can propagate through these two canals. And what will happen then on the other side, that you will have two waves that spread out this, but they will disturb each other. So you will have, and that was what you could see that light was doing as well. And that was confirmed by this interference pattern that you can see on the light behind these double slits. So, I mean, this experiment and other experiments as well put an end to that. It's kind of, light is a wave. And since it's a wave, we need an ether. So ether theory was the accepted theory in science up until the late 19th century, when an experiment was carried out that's called the Michelson-Morley experiment. And what Michelson-Morley wanted to do with their experiment was, through using light, confirm the speed of Earth around the sun. And this is a very significant speed. It's supposed to be 100,000 kilometers per hour. And our rotational speed, if we stand on the equator, we will have about, I think it's 1,500 kilometers per hour. I don't know what you Englishmen or Americans say, miles or something.
Yeah, I think it's about 1,000 miles per hour. So yeah,
1,000 miles per hour. But the speed, the supposed speed of Earth around the sun is much higher. It's hundreds times higher, But the thing is, and also the device that Michelson-Morley used when they tried to measure this speed using light is called an interferometer. Interferometer, yeah. Interferometer, thank you. And this device was used by a gentleman called Sanjak, and he could use it to confirm Earth's rotational speed, this 1,000 miles per hour. But he couldn't. But when Michelson-Morley devised changed an interferometer development specifically to measure Earth's speed around the sun of 100,000 kilometers per hour. They came up with a very small result. It was not at all confirming this speed. And that started, problems and a big discussion, both within astronomy and physics. And they didn't know what to think of this. But eventually, Einstein and a couple of Einstein came up with his theory of special relativity, where he said that light is changing speed. I mean, or time. Light is a constant, and time, special relativity was a way to explain this anomalous result of the Michelson-Morley experiment. And that started, there was a lot of discussions, and there was a lot of scientists that continued doing interferometer experiments and confirmed Michelson-Morley's results. You have Dayton Miller, for example. He carried out thousands of experiments and confirmed these results by Michelson-Morley. But moving on to the double slit experiment, because the interferometer experiments, they assumed or presumed an ether. But in, I don't know exactly which year they did this first, the modified double slit experiment. Because what they did then was, by taking Thomas Young's experiment that confirmed light to be a wave through a medium, they changed the experiment, and they could see that when they shine very little light against the slits, and when they tried to measure, how much light that was passing through the slits, the light changed its behavior. It didn't give this interference pattern anymore. And the conclusion of this experiment is very strange and remarkable, because but this is the accepted view in physics today, quantum physics, because they say, well, because the light change, they assume that the light itself changes its behavior from a wave behavior to a particle behavior. So either then light must be particles, sometimes behaving like waves, or perhaps particles and waves at the same time. But the key thing with, you could say, with quantum physics is that the ether, this medium, doesn't exist anymore in physics. They never talk about ether. They never talk about that this light waves or electromagnetic waves need something to propagate through. Space is just space. It's empty. There is nothing there. And I would say this has truly killed physics. I don't think they can do any more, meaningful progress without bringing back the ether and start thinking in this way. Yeah. And I think you can see a testimony on that as well. I mean, if you go back in history and you look at the 19th century, then the field of physics did amazing things. In the beginning of the 19th century, electricity was just a curiosity. And electricity, that's electromagnetism. In the end of the 19th century, they had figured out electricity and how we can use it. And as I say, it's the most important invention since we learned how to make fire. Humans. It has completely transformed our societies and our way of living. But I mean, what has happened in physics the last 100 years? And I mean, of course, we have made progress. We have computers, we have jetliners, LCDs, etc. But I would say, I mean, because if you look at these paradigms that are in physics today, they are completely unanchored in reality and the scientific method. And the thing is, I mean, the way also, I forgot to explain this with the double slit experiment, is that by conducting this experiment, they assumed that light itself, these photons, change their behavior. But what they forgot to do, which you always should do in science, is to perform some kind of control experiments. And if you try to measure something, and what you measure changes its behavior, then I think it's reasonable to assume and investigate if the measuring equipment is altering the behavior of the thing you are observing. Yeah. But that has never been a question, in quantum physics. And when you look at these so-called photon detectors, they aren't passive. They send out electromagnetic radiation, and light is electromagnetism. So
there's quite likely to be some interference there, isn't it? Again, evidence of unscientificness to not consider that the observation of the experiment was perhaps causing the result is a convenient oversight, you could say, at the very least. Yes, so we have the double slit experiments, which also, of course, open the door philosophically for everybody to claim that contradictions can exist after all, because light is a wave and a particle, or wave-particle duality, and it also opened the door philosophically for the idea that human thought creates reality, because, of course, when the experiment was observed, actually measured, as you say, but the Copenhagen interpretation uses the word observed. The wave of possibility collapses into a particle of actuality. I mean, these things weren't proved, but they were very much picked up on by the quantum physicists and all the gurus that followed throughout the rest of the century, proclaiming that thought creates reality. But that's perhaps another tangential conversation. But
no, I disagree. I mean, it all fits together,
Yes, it does all fit together.
Yeah, and physics today. I mean, the basic physics that's called theoretical physics, or sometimes even mathematical physics, which I think is two horrible words, because physics isn't about theories. It's it's about theories, but you need to confirm your theories using the scientific method.
Yes, and I was going to say,
sure, go ahead.
I mean, from those double slit experiments and the birth of quantum physics, or theoretical physics, as you say, we have this whole idea that effectively reality exists in mathematics. It's all about mathematics, as you said, and their fundamental assumption, which of course isn't verbalized, they don't say it, but the assumption is that reality exists in mathematics. Therefore, the language of mathematics describes reality. Whereas, in fact, mathematics is indeed a language, but it exists in reality. Reality doesn't exist in mathematics. So we've got a fundamental upending of things with what's become known as theoretical physicists now, who are more or less spiritual gurus, aren't they? In the or the high priests, as you said earlier, in the the pseudoscience that we have these days.
But yeah, exactly. Yeah, go ahead.
Can I also tie this back to the Michelson-Morley experiments, because the Michelson-Morley experiments really upset the apple cart, because they really challenged the idea that the Earth flies around the sun at this incredible speed, and 90 times the speed of sound, whatever that is in kilometers per hour. I'm not sure. But this whole idea was seriously threatened the establishment, just over 100 years ago. And something had to be done about that, didn't it? And it seems very convenient that to dismiss the ether. I mean, it's almost as though the ether was dismissed, had to go in order to save the idea that the Earth goes around the sun. Because the Michelson-Morley experiments with their interferometer, as you said, you've been perfectly able to measure the rotation of the Earth at the equator of 1,000 miles per hour. So why wouldn't you be able to measure the speed of the Earth if it's hurtling around the sun at 90 times the speed of sound? It's nonsense to say that you could accept one but not the other. So it seems to me that there's another component to this, isn't there? Astrological or astronomical, components to things was threatening the established order. Would you agree with?
Yes, I would agree, and I mean you have covered this. Simon Schack has done a lot of research on this with his Tychos model, and looked at the Michelson-Morley experiment and Dayton Miller, and it's so interesting. Everything is connected, and when you follow the crumb trail, so to speak, and I mean, they have this horrible contradiction, that, well, the ether doesn't exist, but still an interferometer can confirm Earth's rotational speed, but it cannot confirm Earth's orbit around the sun, and because of the modified double slit experiment, we have no ether. But when you look into this, the way they explain why interferometer can confirm or gives a result when you measure Earth's rotational speed is because of the so-called Sagnac effect, and because Sagnac was the first one who designed an interferometer who could measure Earth's rotational speed, and he used a rotating interferometer.
Right.
So they said that because the interferometer is rotating, there is something happening there. So relativity theory and quantum mechanics is still valid. We have no ether, but because of this. But then interesting thing also that I haven't heard much about, that Michelson, and there is an experiment called the Michelson-Gale-Pearson experiment, I think it's called. And that is, they designed a huge interferometer that didn't rotate, that was stationary on Earth. But since it was so big, they shined lights, with mirrors, because it was so big, they was able to very accurately predict and confirm Earth's rotational speed using this interferometer. And then the relativists and quantum physicists, well, that is because the Sagnac effect as well, because Earth is rotating. But when they carried out the original Michelson-Morley experiment that failed to confirm Earth's speed around the sun, that was on a rotating Earth as well, of course. Yeah. So,
yes, it's there's all sorts of shenanigans going on, isn't there? I mean, I wanted to maybe bring in as well rocket science, because a lot of researchers have questioned the flights to the moon and all that sort of stuff, and without getting too much into the sort of implications of it, the whole science, as you've pointed out before, the whole science of what we're told as the main principle of a rocket's propulsion method is due to the expansion of gases, and this seems problematic. Can you tell us about that?
Yes,
Without going
Nigel,
into too much detail.
No, I'll try. Yes, I mean, it's a fact of physics, and it's so sad that we don't learn this in school anymore. Or I mean, you can. I have actually discussed this with professors in fluid and thermodynamics, and they don't see this problem either. And that is when, and this was, experimented on, and they formulated laws on it in the late 19th century again, or the 19th century sometime. Joule Thomson, and it is, when you have a gas and it expands out into a vacuum, you say that the gas is expanding freely because you have no gas in this area where the gas expands. It's a vacuum. And what happens then is something that's called free expansion. And that means that when a gas expands without any resistance, no work will be done, as it said in physics. There will be no increase in heat, and there will be no pressure difference here that can push this thing where at the other end of the gas. And that's the situation for rockets in space. Space is a vacuum, and there will always be free expansion there. So it's not possible for a rocket to create propulsion in space. But what, the dogma we've been learned, in school and in movies, and, people say, oh, so you don't think an action produces a reaction? Yes, I do. But the problem is here that we don't have any action. This gas is expanding freely out into space, no action, and thus no reaction.
Yeah.
But in an atmosphere, there is no problem for a rocket to create propulsion because the gas expansion meets resistance, the atmosphere. And then you have a pressure increase in the atmosphere behind the rocket that pushes it forward. And it uses the same principles as airplanes, jet engines.
Yeah.
So.
Yes. Yeah, so it seems to me, I mean, there are, at the very least, questions to be asked there. I mean, everybody sort of leaps to various conclusions about spaceflight due to things that they see and observe, but nobody wants to question. Even the professionals, as you alluded to there, aren't prepared to question the basic fact there of an expanding gas in a freely expanding gas exerts no force, as you say. So yeah, again, the questions to be raised there. I mean, we won't go any further with that, but I mean, obviously, we're trying to point out here that science is questionable. Whether or not it's fallen completely is a debate, and it's a provocative title, of course. But we're trying to point out lots of fundamental potential errors here, or observable errors, depending on how you look at them, or whether or not you're prepared to look at them, I think is the issue. And in terms of the politics of today with the climate and so forth, and imminent threat of 15-minute cities and all of this sort of stuff, and reductions in air travel and limitations on our lifestyles, we famously had the sort of phrase that 97% of scientists, climate scientists, say that climate change is real, therefore it's real. And of course, the debate has long since stopped now. Everyone assumes that there is a climate emergency, whereas there really isn't any evidence to back that up. In fact, there's a lot of evidence that contradicts it. But we have this fallacy that's put out that a majority of scientists say so, therefore we're all supposed to snap into line and believe it. It's it's fundamentally unscientific, although obviously this is politicians saying that, it's not scientists. but it's fundamentally unscientific to claim that a majority in numbers has any bearing on truth. It's rather crazy, isn't it? Well, what do you think, Patrik, about this, about the new context of AI, as I mentioned at the beginning of our discussion? Because there seems to be, this air of belief that, oh goodness, now they've invented computers that can think like human beings. So everybody's really sucked onto this ticket, and we've heard about the sort of transhumanism and all this sort of stuff, and people being inserted with chips, potentially, and it helps sort of reinforce this belief in the public mind that, oh, isn't science amazing? So aren't these high priests good? They're really performing miracles. Can you speak to us a little bit about your take on that whole sort of thing around AI and where modern science allegedly is?
Yeah, sure. And I mean, that's an area of expertise of mine as well, because I've studied computer science and artificial intelligence, and what AI is, I don't think actually it should be called AI. It's language models or so-called neural networks, and I think neural networks is a misleading word as well, because it's an algorithm that supposedly mimics a neuron, but it's kind of a black box. And I mean, these language models or neural networks, they were revolutionary in the 80s and 90s, because they could very reliably do optical character recognition, transfer pictures to read or to electronically readable text. But I mean, then we have had a breakthrough in these language models, where they train them on huge amount of information and make them appear as human-like. They answer to questions, but I mean, it's not in any sense intelligence, I would say. But I will also say that they are extremely useful, and it's a great breakthrough and advancement in computer science and the field of computers, and it has totally transformed the industry. And I use AI a lot in my work, when I work with programming. And most of these AI models, they are also very tuned to be helpful in programming. So you can ask it any question and it answers. And I mean, I use it a lot. And I mean, you could see it as, I mean, if you Google something or use any search engine, well, you have to sift through results and you have to present it to yourself in your mind in a condensed way. But here you have a machine that does all that for you. It brings in the information, looks at the question, presents the information in a relevant way. But it's no way any kind of oracle or intelligence. And what you also see is that, of course, these AI, they are trained on our accepted so-called truths and information in our society today. So, if you ask them, for example, I have a fun question to ask an AI, and that is, please give me an observation I can perform myself that confirms that Earth is orbiting the sun. And then the AI will typically answer, well, you have the seasons. But if you then object, well, the seasons doesn't confirm that Earth orbits the sun. The seasons would be exactly the same if the sun is orbiting the Earth. And then, oh, yeah, I'm sorry, I apologize. You are right. And then it goes, then it goes now to another argument.
Yeah.
That you can argue against, and then it apologizes again and goes to next argument. and so it goes on, and then it says, well, NASA, satellites, etc. That confirms this. But I mean, that's not an observation I can do myself.
No.
Or I can reason around. And I would like, because there's so much talk about this, and I think that's by design, all this talk about flat Earth and etc. It's perfectly doable to both confirm in an independent way that Earth is spherical and that Earth rotates. We know that very, very well.
Yeah.
But the issue here is whether we are orbiting the sun or vice versa.
Yes.
That's an open question, actually.
Indeed. Yeah, I mean, I would say with respect to the AI issue that it needs to be remembered that there is no agreement at all on how the human mind conceptualizes. So we can talk about language modeling, but we need to remember that every word is a concept, whether you've got the word pen for something fairly simple, or civilization for something immensely complex, which presupposes hundreds of other conceptual ideas within that concept. So it's not widely agreed. There is no common agreement on how the human mind forms a concept. As we grow up, of course, and we start off as toddlers, and we learn to speak, and we're learning concepts essentially. So because there's no understanding of the method of conceptualization, and we are conceptual beings in nature, concepts, ideas are the things we think with. And anyone talking like me, this is just a string of individual concepts and ideas, but it's not understood how we do this, how we think. So the idea that you can get a computer to do, or you can program a computer to do that which we don't know how we do ourselves yet, is a nonsense. It's impossible. I mean, ipso facto, there's no way you can have genuine intelligence in a computer unless we understand, or unless and until we understand precisely how we arrive at human intelligence, how humans conceptualize, how we think. When that science is known, then I would be a little bit more prepared to accept that there's genuine artificial intelligence, and it comes down to the definitions of the words, of course. I don't believe there is any such thing at the moment as artificial intelligence, but I certainly agree with you, Patrik, that these algorithms and programs and whatever we call them, I suppose algorithms is the best word, they are immensely useful, and they're great. I mean, who would knock them? I mean, I've used Perplexity and the other AI tools, and they're absolutely fantastic. There's no doubt about it. But I think the danger is more in the idea of artificial intelligence. That's where I'm concerned, because again, the public imagines that science to the rescue. Now the computers can think. It's not true. The computers can't think, and I think the idea of AI is quite dangerous, because it actually means that the people programming the algorithms are sort of one up on the general public, who think that the algorithms are a genuinely thinking electronic being, if that's the right word. So I think AI. No. I think it all helps conjure this illusion of a science that perhaps we don't really have.
Yeah, I agree. And there is a saying, what we don't understand, we either worship or fear. And I think that fits very well. Some people, they worship AI. It will
ask the machines.
New intelligence here, and I mean, you have all these executive as the AI companies, they want to raise money, so they show something impressive, and we're gonna what they call a general AI, or when they will have real intelligence, and yeah, just buy our stock, and we will make you rich by creating a truly intelligent AI.
Yes.
And then you have the other side, the people, they will, it will be Terminator, and the AI will send machines into the past or the future and destroy us. So yeah. And it's always about that, these things, creating awe, wonders, going to space, landing on the moon, blah blah blah, or it's creating fear. The climate will collapse if we don't pay more taxes, or you and your family will get sick, seriously sick, if you don't buy the pharma juice.
Yes. And another interesting component, I think, Patrik, is the idea of weather manipulation technology. Now, of course, if you sort of mention that in certain social circles, you'll be laughed at, because, of course, the BBC don't buy into it, and it's not in part of the official narrative. But there were a lot of things heard about the idea of weather manipulation technology. It's not something that should be laughed about. But these kinds of areas of science, and I don't know anything about it, so I'm not going to presume to say anything about it. But it would seem that's entirely sort of don't talk about that. We're going to deny that. Which is obviously a potential legitimate area of inquiry for science. Why wouldn't it be? Why wouldn't we want to manipulate the weather if we could? If we could prevent droughts and help bring the rain, it would be an immensely useful technology for humans to possess. So I'm always slightly suspicious by the sort of mainstream narrative, sort of, hush, that's absolute nonsense to speak of weather manipulation technology. But of course, recently with Hurricane Milton, of course, across the pond over in the US, there's been a spate of people wondering about weather manipulation. Did you have any comment on the sort of hidden technologies?
There is a saying that if you cannot convince, confuse. And I think that is a lot what is going on now in media, and especially, alternative media. And one very apparent aspect of this is all this flat earthery, because, Earth isn't flat, come on. Yeah. But you have hordes of flat earthers, and they don't only talk about flat Earth. They talk about things that actually has substance, and that is we don't go to space, or NASA don't go to space. And if you start looking at these videos, you can see what they say, that they use swimming pools, various techniques to simulate weightlessness. But they don't want to discredit that, to don't use people. So they have flat earthers presenting this, and then people can go, "Oh, that ain't true because it's stupid flat earthers." Let's say that, and the thing is, I see similar tendencies in this so-called chemtrails. Because of course, it's technically possible to manipulate the weather by releasing chemicals up in the clouds using airplanes. But is it feasible? Why would they do it? And you as an airman knows, Nigel, that a very natural consequence of jet engines is condensation trails. You have a rapid heat up of the air behind the engine, and then it cools down, and then the water in the air condenses, creating a trail. But there is so much, awakened people that points in the sky. Oh, there's a trail. Now they're putting out chemicals in the atmosphere. And I don't say that they couldn't do that if they wanted to. but I don't see any point in doing that. It would be very costly and you know, to but it's a good thing you can make people talk about and create confusion.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think there's a good book, or you know, Sun Tzu's The Art of War, and it says, you know, make the enemy expend their energy where it's useless. You know, so they want people to dive into all these made up conspiracy theories and fear porn, so they don't, you know, discover something and talk about something that actually is important. So,
yes,
yeah.
I agree. I mean, I've worked as an airline pilot for 25 years, and I was always looking out for signs of chemtrails or craft that could deliver such, but I never saw anything like that. But I do agree that in some respects, it's not really a high importance issue. You know, it's not something that we should be you know, primarily focused on. As you say, there are more important issues. I mean, it could tie into the climate thing, I suppose. But yeah, I do see that as something of a distraction, along with, as you say, the flat earthers. And, you know, though many people wouldn't even talk about those two things in the same sentence as mentioning the word science, I think that they are relevant in this discussion, because they're all part of the muddying of the waters and the confusion. And just to come back to the philosophical point, I am a philosopher, and I see this as being very important to the loss of truth in our culture, and the ease with which we're deceived. Is as we were talking about earlier with the quantum physicists declaring that contradictions can exist, and mainstream philosophy has been saying that human consciousness creates reality ever since Immanuel Kant's seminal work in 1781. But this was very much reinforced by the double slit experiments, and indeed so many mystics, and tragically so many truth seekers, so many people who claim to want freedom, who claim to want to know the truth, who claim to not want world government and to live free lives. Many of these people also hold the idea that human consciousness creates reality, and this actually destroys the concept of truth, and it undermines science as a consequence. You know, what is knowledge if reality is not a fixed and objective absolute that remains constant, and we have to discover? That's what science is, discovering reality. If we take away that idea, then we've really pulled the rug out from underneath science. I mean, what's the point of science? In fact, according to mainstream philosophy and all those that would, the subjectivists that think that thought creates reality, really all we have to do is introspect and look into our minds to find the truth, because that's the source of everything. If human consciousness, the mind, creates reality, then that's the source of truth. I mean, my goodness, we're really lost if we, and I think our culture is really lost scientifically in terms of truth, deception, any certainty, knowing what's going on. And I think that the philosophy is right at the root of it. And it's interesting that the double slit experiment and this whole, as we're calling it, fall of science is compromised by the fact that people no longer think that reality is a real, objective, absolute.
Yeah, it's really tragical. And I mean, when we talked about the double slit experiment before, and I encourage everyone to investigate this. But I mean, I can do funny analogies sometimes, but it's very relevant. I mean, if you're a scientist and you want to see if there is any gasoline, you know, in a gas tank, and you use a match, you know, to get light and look down in the gas tank, and the thing explodes. If you then reach the conclusion that, gasoline is a chemical substance that self-combusts when you try to observe it, then you're not much of a scientist. And I mean, that's kind of what they're doing. And I have to tell you, Nigel, I was, I'm working at home renovating, and I was plastering a wall, and I was actually listening to a lecture, and he's by Sir Roger Penrose, and he's a renowned British mathematician, mathematical physicist, and philosopher of science. And when you listen to a guy like this, and I mean, he talks about quantum physics and all, and it's into the holy grail in quantum physics or theoretical physics or mathematical physics is to find the reason that the field equation collapses. And what they're talking about there is that because of the double slit experiments, they think they have confirmed the duality of light or electromagnetic, but sometimes it's a particle and sometimes it's a light, and light you describe with field equations. So they have to find out when, does this light, this wave behavior of light collapse and become quanta. And another thing, he talks about various realities, realities and dimensions. And I mean, how can you seriously, as a scientist, say that you can figure out something in one reality or 3 dimensions about another reality or dimension? It's insane.
Yeah, it's insane to talk about. Yeah, it is insane.
And the problem here is, I mean, you're a philosopher and you are an objectivist, if I'm correct. And you say that what we need to do in philosophy, the thing about philosophy is that we have the reality as an objective absolute and something we agree on. And that is also the absolute foundation for science. If we don't have that premise, we can't do any science. And here they do claim to do science without this premise.
Yeah. I mean, it's a nonsense to talk about another reality, because if we just remind ourselves of the definition of reality, reality is everything that exists. So the term encompasses everything. So if you found something else, it isn't in another reality, it's in this one. So it's just nonsense on stilts, isn't it? But if you've got somebody like Penrose talking in such absurdities, then is it any wonder that the average man on the street believes a load of nonsense as well? And I suggest perhaps it isn't.
No, it isn't. And I don't know, if they are a member of some secret club or whatever, or if they actually believe these things themselves. I think that mostly the latter. They believe that they can reason in this way, that they can do mathematical calculations and figure something out about another reality. And it's and I think, there is, this old Danish folk story, The Emperor's New Clothes. And that describes the situation we are in. In order to have a reputable career within science, and almost any field now, you have to accept these paradigms that are either falsifiable or unconfirmable. So yeah,
I agree. So I mean, by way of conclusion, then, Patrik, I mean, I'm keen to get your thoughts in a minute, but maybe I can just bat you mine. I think that most of these scientists today do believe their own fiction. Frankly, I think this is due to the cultural wave of irrationality that has sort of been brought upon deliberately, but it's self-sustaining. I mean, as soon as a culture loses track of reality and even starts to entertain the idea that reality isn't an objective absolute, which, by the way, is the basic presupposition of all human functionality, rests on the presupposition that reality is real and exists and it's separate from our consciousness. So, I mean, as soon as our culture gets on board the premise that that's not the case, then it's really indicative that our culture has lost its way. And even though I suspect that was deliberately initiated, because Kant, the philosopher Immanuel Kant, proposed his philosophical idealism that sort of started in Germany about 250 years ago. He proposed this in the context of the birth of the scientific revolution. You know, the Enlightenment was happening all around him. All around him was the idea that reason can solve all of humanity's problems. That was the cultural vibe. Wow, isn't this exciting? We're going to fix everything. And of course, religion was threatened. So I think that it's absurd in that climate that philosophers could go, I wonder if reality is real and if we can know it or not. You know, I mean, it's just nonsense. You couldn't come to that conclusion when all around you scientists are discovering objective reality. So, yeah, I mean, long story short, I think our culture is lost, and our science, or what passes for science, is also lost. And although we've got many incredible refinements of existing technologies, you know, our smartphones are incredible, and there's a lot of really good technologies, but I would postulate that they are pretty near the end of the possibility of refinements of existing basic technologies. And in researching for this show, I was looking up the World Economic Forum's, you know, list of emerging technologies, as they call them, and there's nothing really foundational in there. You know, developing better lenses and better measuring equipment and different animal feeds and things to save the environment. I mean, there's nothing of substance there, you know. So yeah, I personally think that science has become pseudoscience, but I mean, I'd really rather leave the listener to draw their own conclusion. I shouldn't be foisting mine. But what are your thoughts, Patrik?
Yeah, and I agree, and it's such a tragedy as well that science has been so corrupted, because you know you have got a lot of good people in science, and they are trying, you know, the best. But when the science is resting on these paradigms that aren't allowed to be questioned, it's very limited what you can accomplish. And also, I mean, I love science. I mean, I think that's, you know, the best. Of course, it's the best tool we have to figure out things, and it enables technological progress. And I mean, you know, it's kind of a philosophical thing as well. I mean, people say, well, what does it matter, you know, if we can drive around in cars instead of using a horse and carriage? But I think that's you know, a fundamental thing for a prosperous and functioning human society, you know, that people are allowed to figure out things out and do real science. That's when things work. And I mean, sure, we can question what's the use of that, but and I also think it's very tragic, because this, you know, holding back or corruption of science and keeping everything so much. I mean, there's the saying, knowledge is power, and I think that's why this is done. You know, they you know, this much of the science we have today is just a way to protect as much as the actual knowledge, because they don't want too many people to figure things out, because then their you know, role in the society is threatened. And I actually, just before we started this podcast, I watched a video by, Graham Hancock. He's done a new Netflix series where he talks, history. And history is corrupted as well. I mean, if you look at the pyramids, I mean, they say that they built them with primitive means, and you have in a lot of places in Egypt, you have perfectly crafted gigantic granite blocks, etc. So I think in light of that, it's pretty obvious that we had an very advanced human civilization, a couple of tens of thousands of years ago. And they probably didn't ditch ether theory and other things, and that was what enabled them to figure out these things. And here we are, with relativity and quantum mystics.
Yeah,
and we're stuck. There won't be any, invention comparable to electricity. With this. You can just forget it. So.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you for mentioning, the ancient monuments and so forth that obviously point to technology lost, technology that we no longer have. And I mean, one last point I wanted to add is that I think it's ultimately the political control that is behind this fall of science. I think that science is things are given money if they're politically useful, and certain sciences are and certain sciences aren't, and the support, the financial support goes in the direction where the political agenda dictates ultimately. And it's not a good state of affairs. But it does offer some optimism. I'm optimistic that our technology could improve, fantastically, even above what we have come to take for granted today. So that's a very much a positive that I take away from this fall of science induced by politics.
Yeah, and I'm an optimist as well, Nigel, and I think during these last 5, or I should even say 10 years, or even a bit more, actually, I have researched these things and figured out so many things when you start to question for real, and it's. It's a wonderful and empowering journey, and it's also very nice to see now that more and more people are starting to do this, to step out of the the corridor, or what we should call it.
Yeah.
And so that's the time we live in.
Indeed. Well, excellent. Thank you so much, Patrik, for your time and all your thoughts. Really appreciate your perspective on this discussion of modern science. Where is it? Pseudoscience or whatever. Thank you so much for your time, and thank you everybody for listening. There's more at the website. Don't forget to check there, lawfulrebel.com. And please do join us again for yet another episode of Living Outside the Matrix.
To see, be the change you want to see, be the change you want to see.